Hello, and welcome to the webinar, It's Not Scary If You Know How to Prepare All Students. My name is Chad Cunningham from the Alice Training Institute, and I'll be your guide through this webinar. Today I'd like to start with our learning objectives. Our learning objectives for today is we will be looking at the cognitive development stages of student growth and how we can use these cognitive levels with our learning objectives and our learning plans, and how they look at where's our students cognitively, not just as a learning method. And we'll look at those cognitive stages produced by Jean Piaget. The second learning objectives we're going to look at is identifying age-appropriate training ideas. So we're going to take these cognitive levels that our students are involved in and see what kind of training aids, training materials we can design, and how do we reach our students in our schools. And then as we look through it, we'll talk about some resources and references that we have through Alice in order to provide those trainings to your students. We're going to start with Jean Piaget.
He was actually tasked in his earlier career of taking an English intellectual quiz and put it into French. And as he was going through this, he was wondering, really at that time, why is it only adults? Why children aren't really looked at during these intellectual trainings and concepts? Because really, Piaget was the first psychologist during that time that really thought more of children than most others did. Most other psychologists at that time, back in the early 40s, thought that children were less competent thinkers than adults. But during Piaget's research, he found that really they're very intelligent and they just think different ways than the adults. Really, Piaget during his research found that this concept of cognitive thought was made out of a schema. A schema, I want you to think of a schema as more of a way to organize knowledge. B.J. Wadsworth, another psychologist, stated that these schemas are like, I want you to think of them as index cards. They're index cards stored in the brain. It's kind of like that process of we learn something, we see something, it gets stored on a index card and we put it in the Rolodex. Yes, I am dating myself at this time. You put it in the Rolodex and it's in the back of your mind. And then really, every time a stimulus or information is needed, the brain, the cognitive ability goes through that Rolodex and brings up that schema or that card. And really when that card and that schema is brought up and together, it looks at intellectual growth and it looks at how we really look and respond to that information. And that information is really the difference between a simulation and accommodation. If the stimulus or information comes up, and let's say, for instance, the simulation would be, let's say, a futon. Now, we all know what a futon is. It's half couch, half bed. Well, what a person would do if they've never saw a futon before, they would look at it going, all right, this kind of looks like a couch, so they would bring up their index card, their schema of what the concepts of a couch are. And then they bring up a concept going, well, it kind of lays down as a bed. So then they bring up the information in their brain of what are the concepts of a bed. And then they would take those areas and make a new schema and assimilate the information they already know into a brand new schema card. Now, by doing that, they're using the information they already have. Sometimes, though, our brains have to accommodate. The schema has to be accommodating. And when we really look at the accommodation, really during this time, he talks about the accommodation of looking at the information there just doesn't fit what they're seeing or what they're engaging in. So that schema card has to be changed. It has to be enhanced in order to accommodate, since the word accommodation, to what they're seeing there. So it's always a learning process and develop. So now that accommodation, that card's kind of, think of it when you're in Word and you send your Word document over to somebody else to look at, and they cross out words and they add words. That's kind of what that accommodation portion of the schema really needs to be. Now, with Piaget, as he looks at these assimilation and these expectations, he kind of came up with 4 levels of cognitive development. These 4 levels of cognitive development is looking at the sensory motor, the pre-operational, the concrete operational, and the formal operations. And as you see here, I have ages under each one. The sensory motor is ages 0 to 2, the pre-operational is 2 to 7, and then the formal operations is from about age 11 and older. The thing is, I want to say to everybody up front as we go through these, sometimes formal operations, not everybody hits by age 11. It might be older. Some of us might not ever really hit formal operations. So really, as we look at this, I just want you to understand that these are some stages that, as these age groups that you're interacting with, this is kind of where they are cognitively as you're trying to teach them new information. Now, sensory motor, most of us are not going to be engaging too much with the sensory motor inside our school districts. This is at 0 to 2, so you might have family members or remember the kids of your own. Their main achievement during this stage is really object permanence, knowing that an object's still there even if it's hidden. And it really requires the ability to form a mental representation of the object or that schema. So they're just starting their schemas, they're starting those index cards of this is a rattle, this is mom, this is dad, and really going through those. As they progress cognitively and by age, they get into the pre-operational stage. And really this pre-operational stage, they think about things symbolically. So when we really start looking at, and if you can remember when you were younger and what we do with our kids now, we start reading them books. And what is the books? It's the 3 Little Pigs and the Big Bad Wolf, or again, dating myself, Humpty Dumpty, or whatever the areas might be. Good Night Moon. So really using these ability to make one thing, a word or an object, stand for something other than itself. So really using metaphors and understanding how are those development really thinking. And that pre-operational stage at 2 to 7, and maybe even a little bit older, really start looking at that. And our thought processes, they're still a little egocentric. Sometimes it's harder for them to take the view of other people. So as we look at it, some of us might still be at pre-operational as we go through some of these days. But as they get older, as their cognitive level increases, they start going into the concrete operational stage. And concrete operational stage is that logical or operational thought. Here, the kids can work on internally in their head, so they start being able to calculate more inside their brains. They start looking at trying out new things in the world. They can start conserving numbers right around age 6, math, and weight. And really, even though as we start looking at their ability to do this cognitively, it's not all that cognitive approach is. I know some of you might be saying, well, it could be, based on some of where they start and stop within these stages, can be based on environmental, it could be based on social, it could be based on how they were raised. And that's absolutely true. Piaget just kind of starts looking at, and there's been other forms of research as the years have gone by, but just this concrete level. And really, conservation is the understanding that something stays the same in quantity, even though its appearance changes. So as we start looking at the operational thought, they can start putting things together and understanding processes and where they can go. The last portion of this, the formal operation stage, he says it begins about stage 11. Again, it depends on culture, depends on where they are at. It could flux one way or another. And again, some people might not ever hit formal operation. But during this time, people develop the ability to think about abstract concepts. They start looking at it logically. They start testing hypotheses. So they say, if I put this, I totally lost my thought on what I was going to explain there. I apologize. But if I shake up the bottle of soda and I open the lid, what's going to happen? Well, is it going to spray all over? Is it not going to spray over? Is it going to go flat? So they start testing it. And this is one of those messy tests where they shake it up and they open the bottle and they see what happens. So really, this formal operation is really testing those hypotheses. So as we start looking at age-appropriate training, I think it's important. Yeah, we can look at the different learning aspects, the visual, the auditorial, the kinesthetic, the logical, and know about how they're learning. But I think taking it from another approach on the cognitive, how are they developing cognitively, and how can we reach them there? So understanding Piaget and those cognitive development, I want to look at now the concepts of pre-K through 12th grade. What are some strategies that we can look at based on the areas of learning? Now, as we start looking at our stages of learning and educational, we need to really focus on the process of learning and not the end product. So when we start looking at the cognitive approach, really you want to facilitate the learning, not so much tell them directly. Because as we start looking at learning in more of a student-centered approach, that's an educational term that's been around for a while and has really got a lot of traction lately also, but it's all about student-centered. So having that student at the center, not you as a trainer or the teacher being that focus. So having them involved, being sure that the process of learning is really focused on them, not so much what I can do. You want to use, when you're interacting with these students, active methods. And these active methods need to be able to allow them to discover and rediscover or reconstruct the truths. So again, especially in those higher areas of that concrete formal operations, they need to be able to test those hypotheses. Allowing them to have collaborative learning. So yes, putting them into groups, allowing them to, in our case, if it's a violent critical incident, having them as a group figure out how is the best way to barricade that doorway and allow them to work together and problem solve. Allow them to create that disequilibrium, because really when you start looking at the assimilation and the accommodation, equilibrium is right in between there. And if that equilibrium gets pushed one way or another, they will search to find, so that equilibrium gets messed up and gets moved around, they will research, they will find the correct schema to make it right again. So it allows them to learn and develop those quote unquote index cards to have that information that they can pull from when the situation dictates or that they have the ability as a stimulus comes into play. And you want to evaluate the level of this child's development. And you always want to do an evaluation, whether it's a formative evaluation as your presentation's going through, as you're training these individuals, these young people. Formative evaluation is halfway through, asking a couple questions, just seeing if they're understanding what you want them to be, and are they collecting the data that they need to. If not, it gives you that time to enhance your presentation and make sure that you go back and visit where it's at. You can also do a summative evaluation at the end of the class by different methods, whether it's an exam, it's just a question and answer. You can use technology in the form of a Kahoot and have it more interactive in gaming. A lot of educators, a lot of schools are using Kahoot platform a lot. Engaging them in some type of evaluation to know, all right, they did accept and they did get into the information and the knowledge that I wanted them to have. So when we start looking at pre-K, really pre-K, remember they're symbolic and they're learning by words. But some of them might not be able to read yet, or they're just learning to read. So in that pre-K environment, we want to really look at starting to make sure they follow the teacher's directions immediately. They give and respond to the quiet signal, because again, we want them to be able to be quiet. And you can really engage them in this in activities. So give and respond to the quiet signal. A very good game activity to play is red light, green light. So if you've never played that game before, that's always having someone yelling red light, green light, and they start and stop. You can do it with signals. You can use Mother May I. So there's a lot of different activities that you can use in order to have that training idea reinforced. At this age also, especially when we're talking pre-K, we're talking more of that 4- and 5-year-old approach, is really to start expanding their vocabulary. Starting to talk about safety inside and safety outside. Just, little words that you can use. If we're doing safety inside, this is what we're doing. If we're doing safety outside, we're evacuating, going to our rally points. And what are those areas? And really starting to look at, we have here a Safety for You and Me coloring book that we have available to everybody, that they can look at the story of what it is about safety inside, safety outside, and they can color it, which is working on their cognitive skills and their physical skills that they need to work on in school anyways. It allows them to reinforce as a group what is expected of them during this type of training. But the biggest thing here we want to look at and make sure in that pre-K is expand that safety vocabulary to safety inside, safety outside. Remember, the words and pictures represent objects. So we can start using those metaphors, and starting to understand that symbolically thinking, and then again follow those teachers' directions. And for the younger kids in our pre-K, again, it's more of training and educating the adults in the room on what to do and how to what to do with the kids in those smaller age rooms, instead of more so training the kids on what to do, the responses. Our responses are more training with the pre-K and the 4- and 5-year-olds than it is with the 2- or 3-year-olds in our daycare and pre-K areas. So that is our pre-K area. Moving from pre-K into the K through 3, so our elementary, and we kind of broke it down into elementary, and we'll kind of hit some intermediate, middle, and high school. And you'll see a lot of this cognitive levels from Piaget really approach both the pre-K, and they kind of flow simultaneously with some of our older kids also. Again, still at this time frame of kindergarten through 3rd grade, they're thinking symbolically. So our metaphors, our storytelling, our activities are still most of the time metaphoric, looking at one thing responding to another. When you start looking at your training ideas for this age group, you really want to start looking at using stories to explain different roles. And these roles can be that of the teacher, the student. What is the bad guy going to do, or the violent intruder, depending on what terms you're using with your students within your schools. And what does everybody do in those roles? And telling stories on those roles help them understand how to respond. At this age group, we're reinforcing following directions quickly. We want the kids to be able to be quiet as quickly as possible, get in line if need be able to evacuate. They start participating in drills and hands-on training. So again, if we want to look at the learning areas, the learning development, along with our cognitive here, are they kinesthetic? Are they doing hands-on? They'll remember more. And we start putting them into the drills as far as we're going to evacuate today. So evacuation, here's the alert, here's the information coming in, and we're going to evacuate out the doors now. So now they actually get to do it. They get to hear kind of what's going on, and they can put all those together. Your activities allow the students to interact and learn. Again, this can be even performed in gym class. So, how do we get away from the violent intruder? Well, one way is to run in a zigzag. A game that a lot of gym classes play is sharks and minnows. So do we change the terms of sharks and minnows, but the game plays the same? You're trying to get away from the shark. The shark is that violent intruder. So again, that symbolic words and pictures represent different objects and different items. They understand cognitively and approach it from a learner's perspective. So when we start looking at our K through 3rd grade students, we need to remember the 3 top things is to use stories to explain different roles, have students start participating in hands-on training and drills. So have them understand, what is the counter strategy? How do we evacuate? We get in line. Are we holding hands or having our rope, or especially in our younger kindergarten, 1st graders? Are we able to get out of there, and what are those objects that we need to use in order to perform the task. And then remember that words and pictures for symbolic thinking. They understand what the metaphors are and where we're at with that. Now in our K through third grade, we actually at Alice have a book, and I'm sure many of you have seen it. If not, you can get on Amazon or our website and look at it. But it's called I'm Not Scared, I'm Prepared, because I know all about Alice. And inside this book, it uses that symbolic approach, that metaphoric approach, talking about the sheep, the shepherd, and the wolf. Well, again, as we look at how our students are cognitively developed, the shepherd is the teacher, the one in charge that we need to listen to. The sheep is the students that the shepherd protects, and our educators protect our students. And then the wolf, in every story that we have learned and been read through growing up, is always that violent intruder or that bad guy. So they understand what those terms are, and you can start using those terms, that book, in order to deliver that story and make them understand on what we need to do with that activity. And along with that book, we also have an activity book that goes along with it that allows you to perform activities that allows the students to interact and learn based on the story that they just heard. So that's a lot of good information out there that's available to you guys, and that you can use to really hit that K through third grade level when we look at the stories. Everybody doing good? I have not had the look from Colleen yet that I'm doing anything wrong, so we must still be going all right. So now we're moving up into that intermediate stage, kind of third grade. Now we're fourth through fifth grade. And really that K through fourth through fifth, we talked about, I think I actually skipped fourth through fifth, I apologize. Fourth grade through fifth grade. They're still thinking symbolically. They may be going a little bit into that concrete, operational. But this is what I have found interacting with the students, that it's kind of like the book, the storytelling that we want them to have, it's a little too young for them, but they're not quite big enough for our full-on strategies. But we need to look at, they're thinking symbolically, but they're also looking at operational thought. So they have some pre-operational, they're looking still at that logical, and a lot of them might still start moving into that concrete operational stages. So as we start looking at that, to me, this is where we really need to up our game a little bit to really make sure we touch those fourth through fifth graders. And those training ideas here is start using those full vocabulary and strategies of option-based programs. So what are we actually going to do? The training ideas still drills and hands-on training. So they're still performing the drills. We can never do those too much because, again, depending on what they've been doing, we want to make sure that they're doing the right thing for us. And start using maybe media in our training. So using videos to show what we want them to do. Presentations with interactivity. So if you're going to do a face-to-face approach with the students' class, having them interact some way, having them interact with barricading it or moving around. So showing them and allowing them to feel important enough that you respect them as young people and at their cognitive development, that they can perform these tasks and strategies. One thing we look at in our tasks and strategies is lessons should be like a show and do. And I'm going to start at the bottom and work my way up. But really, show and do's, it used to be the old CPR concept, the way I look at it. When we used to learn CPR a long time ago, we'd see a video, we watch it, and then we went and performed that. And with our fourth through fifth and really on up through 12th, the more interaction, they're expecting media, they're expecting more interaction. Our kids are always watching YouTube videos and watching YouTube videos of other people doing videos. And so this is their world, and we need to meet them in their world. And so if you can put something together that's media driven, talks about what I call the stop and do's, so provides the information and then you have them stop it, you show them what it is, and then you have them stop and then you have them perform it. Again, looking at those learning and cognitive levels works very, very well. Drills and hands-on trainings are there. And again, use the full vocabulary and strategies. Don't try to think, well, I don't want to scare them. I don't want to use the right words, because they will call you out on it. We did a little pilot program of some lessons that's going to be coming out in April. And it was neat, the 4th through 5th graders, they felt empowered, and really part of it, when we provided the stop and do trainings for them, and they felt like they were big kids. And you'd be surprised how, by just allowing them to feel like they're the older kids and understanding and reaching that cognitive level, how more engaged they were and how they remembered on what they needed to be. So as we start going through 4th grade, 5th grade, and moving up in our cognitive levels, really start looking at how can I really get them involved and make them feel important, just as we know they are. Next age group we really look at, now we're starting to look into the middle school world. Excuse me, I know some of you might have middle schools that are 5th grade through 8th grade. So some of that 4th through 5th might not be that intermediate. Some of you might, again, depending on where you're at throughout the United States. But our 6th through 8th grade, per Piaget, he's saying that they should be in this cognitive level of concrete operational. So they start thinking abstractly, and they reason about hypothetical problems, and they think more about morals, philosophical, ethical, social, and political issues. This is a time where I hear many times talking to people out and about that they're like, well, if I talk to my kid about the safety stuff and what they're doing as far as responding to a violent critical incident and what they're teaching in school, I don't want them to be afraid. I don't want them to know what's going on. Especially at this age, and especially in their cognitive level, they already know what's going on. They're already knowing socially and politically. I know my oldest son's a sophomore, but even in 8th grade, they were into politics actually more than I was. They start understanding that from the school aspects and looking at what's ethical and what's not as they're growing up. So again, it's cognitive, but it's also social. What are they learning? And when we try to keep stuff from them at this age, again, I've seen people be called out. I've been called out on it, going, hey, I have a plan for this already. We're going to do X, Y, Z. And it's amazing what our kids can come up with cognitively on what their response is going to be before we can even get in there. So many times they're already up and running because of where they're at cognitively, and we need to catch up to them. And really the training ideas at this age group, now that they're more, hypothetical and what ifs and how can I do this, and it's requiring more theoretical and abstract reasoning, we need to look at, again, that full vocabulary and strategies of option-based programs. So using the words we need to use. They know what they are. Between, they understand the violence. They understand what's going on. They're seeing it on TV. They're reading it in books. They're looking at it on YouTube. Research came out. I think it's like 90% of most TV shows have some type of violence in it, and movies. So it's not something that's new to them. They're already thinking abstractly. So allow them to use that knowledge, again, to get them involved in the drills and the hands-on training. You can use a presentation with them, excuse me, a PowerPoint, but that's interactive. It allows them to, again, go back to that stop and do's lesson. So show and do's even. Here, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're talking about. This is a strategy we want, option-based strategy. This is how you do it. Show them how it's actually supposed to be done, and then allow them to perform it. As we start looking at that, they get to see it, they get to hear it, and then they get to do it. And the retention level increases exponentially. So 6 through 8, looking at those cognitive and looking at where we can bring them up to. Then we have our high school, the great years of high school, where everybody knows everything. Why? And I'm sure some USROs in the high schools are going, why do they think they know everything? Well, they think they know everything because, again, cognitively, they're right there at that concrete operational thought. Some of them may be in that formal operational, depending, again, on where they're at. But they're thinking more about those philosophical, ethical, social, and political issues again, and wondering and figuring out hypothesis, and I can get away with this or I can not get away with that, and this is how this should work and why doesn't it work? And they start testing their boundaries a little bit more and more. But as we start looking at this in our training, it's very important that we start allowing them to use those abstract reasonings, especially our high school kids. They have a plan, they know what it is, and they're going to do what they think is right if we don't tell them and guide them in what we kind of know would be a better option. So really, as we go through this and we look at those 9th through 12th graders, we really need to allow them to have the full vocabulary. So we're using the proper terms. We're telling them exactly what to do. We don't have to use those metaphoric approaches. They're past all that. They know what's going on. And many times, I'm sure you've seen it, they might know more than you on some of the social, political, and philosophical areas of what they've learned. They are part of those drills and hands-on training. They need to have all three of those learning concepts. As our kids get older, they also get taller and have more size and mass. So what we do is we start adding now in those training areas, in that 9 through 12, excuse me, control tactics. And those control tactics, again, is how is all age appropriate, especially in our ALICE program, as you know. But we can start allowing them to have a little bit more requirements based on their age and their physical abilities. Another thing that comes in play with our high school kids, and even some of our middle school, with that hypothesis cognitive learning, they really start thinking critical presentations. They can start thinking of what ifs, and they're going to start asking you guys, what if this, what if that? In law enforcement, I'm sure many of you have done those what if games, or the when thens, I always call them with my guys. And those critical thinking is, if this is going to happen, what is my next step going to be? You can actually perform these concepts and strategies with those high school students at that 9 through 12. And it's very easy to do. It's a presentation-based model. And you can perform critical thinking exercises with them to allow them to start being able to be part of the solution and part of the learning that's student-centered, and have fun doing it. Because you can even have them help participate, maybe a group of them, actually designing and thinking of what that critical thinking exercise is. Now, some of you might be listening to this going, all right, what's a critical thinking exercise? I'm not really sure what you mean by that. Well, I'm glad you asked that question, and I'm sure somebody wrote in. If not, Colleen made it up. And so I want to go through a quick little critical thinking exercise with you all, and then we can discuss on how you can design one very, very simple if you haven't already. So when we look at critical thinking exercises, the first thing you want to do in a critical thinking exercise is basically set the stimulus. So what's going to go on? Here, we are going to look at, and I always like showing a video to set the stage. So what is the problem that we're going to interact with? What's our stimulus? Here, you will see a bunch of students walking into the office space, into the school, and as they're walking into the school, somebody pulls out a weapon and starts yelling, "Where are you, Mr. Smith? Where are you, Mr. Smith?" As he's yelling, "Where are you, Mr. Smith?" out comes a handgun in his hand, and now I want to know from the group, what would you do in that situation? If you were those 3 or 4 people behind them, you're 2 to 3 feet away from this gentleman who's pulled a weapon out, what would you do? Now, we're going to ask all of you to answer this. We're going to set up a poll that you should see here shortly. And I would like you to answer what you would do by selecting lockdown, evacuate, or counter. So go ahead and select which one. It is. We'll give you a couple seconds here. Speed up. All right, so everybody's in. So, nope, we're still
coming in.
Still coming in.
We'll give you guys another about 10 or 15 seconds to vote since they're still rolling in so quickly.
All right, I think we'll have a good enough area here. Let's see. Our results are 11% selected lockdown, 11% selected evacuation, and 79% selected thought counter would be the best option. None of the options are wrong. It's just what's the best, better, good, better, best. And with your information, so now we have here, we think counter is. So now if we select the counter, we would have the information on what would happen. So now as you're interacting with the students, they selected, this is the outcome of their selection. So this outcome is basically looking at the distraction of the intruder for them to not be able to shoot accurately, and then the control. Again, we're talking high school, so they have the math. So you can show a video on what the outcomes are and explain to them why that outcome was okay. You can then go back, though, and look at, well, some of you thought evacuation was. Well, evacuation, again, I'm 2 to 3 feet away. Evacuation is what I want to get, but I might not be able to because I might have to do something else before that. If I had more distance, if I was maybe 10 feet away from that intruder, evacuate would be my initial operation. But being 2 to 3 feet, I'm very, very close, and I'm going to have to make a decision first to maybe counter and then evacuate. And if I do want to evacuate, as you saw in the video, I want to do that, maybe moving that zigzag motion. So again, explain to them what's going on and then utilizing the videos. Lockdown, some of you said lockdown, but if we lock down in a hallway, as you saw, this could be an outcome. And you probably can't hear this, but the group of instructors that performed this, the noise making of the weapon was kind of funny. It was a boo, boo, boo sound. So it was kind of interesting there. So you can use a little bit of humor even within this type of event. But it shows what the results are from their decision making. So again, having that critical thinking decision, here's a scenario, here's an event. Now that the event has transpired, this is where you're at, what would you do? It allows them to think critically, it allows them to look at hypothesis, and you provide responses for each one so they understand what was good, what was bad, and why is that. So that's a quick little easy critical thinking drill that you can use. It's just a presentation, you video it, you put it in a PowerPoint, and you're ready to go. If you need more information on that, you can always email me, and I can send you kind of a demo, and you can take ours out and use it as a template. So in conclusion, we talked today about the cognitive development stages of students according to Piaget. Remember, as we look at their cognitive levels by age, we really need to understand also how we make sure our lessons are student-centered. We focus on the process of learning rather than the end product. How are they gathering that information? We use active methods within their world, use collaborative as well as individual activities so they learn from each other as well as the information you want them to learn. So activities can be hands-on training, or it could be just an evaluation of a cut and paste, using core curriculum also at the same time. And then if you're using activities that are core curriculum based, which means activities that they must learn at different age groups as they go through school. The educators will think you're really phenomenal because you're doing core curriculum on top of providing the information they need to survive in life. And understanding, devising the situations that present with those. So those all fall under that category of understanding the students and how we can get a hold of them and identify those age. Remember, make sure that it's interactive, storytelling in the younger ones, and activities and interaction that allows them to all perform at the different levels. And we talked a little bit about some of the resources that are available through ALICE as far as our coloring book, our I'm Not Scared, I'm Prepared book. And by end of April, we will have actual lesson plans available to our K-12 e-learning clients that will go from pre-K to 12th grade on lesson plans on how to interact with the students with the program. So that was where we were at, a lot of information in a short period of time. Like to open it up for questions. If anybody has them, use the question and answer button or the chat button, sorry, thank you. And we'll get some of those answered.
Yeah, a lot of you have been asking if you will have access to the presentation. Absolutely. So as soon as we're done with the webinar, we will send out an email that will include a link to the presentation. And then we'll post all of this stuff on the webinar page, which you will have a link to as well.
Absolutely.
So other than that, there have been some questions just about the scenarios and how they get access to that. So those of you who have asked, we did answer you right through the chat.
Yeah, Chad, could you maybe explain some of the process for how those videos are made so that people can duplicate what you did with that scenario?
Sure. The question was, how does that critical thinking scenarios really develop? What's the media behind it and how does it work? Basically, if anybody's been through one of our instructor 2-day courses, on day 2, we actually assist you in developing these. So this was actually a student group that put that one together, and we use it for a lot of different scenarios. Basically, they videoed themselves. They ended up writing a script on what the event was going to be, the 3 outcomes, and then what was those outcomes going to look like. And then they just took their iPhones. We all have it. They videoed the outcome that they wanted, and then they downloaded the videos off the iPhone or any other recording device. And with that, they started looking at embedding it into the presentation, and then they're just hyperlinks to the different slides, and voila, there you have it. So when you guys get access to this presentation, you'll have the template in there, and all you have to do is embed your videos and change your notes.
One of the things I want to switch gears to from question perspective, just because I think it's a really important topic to discuss. Somebody asked about how you incorporate the counter strategy for students in the 9th through 12th grades. So can you discuss that in more detail?
Sure. Counter strategies, again, that ability to disrupt the attacker from shooting accurately, looking at the OODA loop presentation we've all talked about, and understanding that as we have environmental weapons around us, environmental tools, to be able to throw at the individuals using stress balls, soft items work very well. And then what you can add with the 9 through 12 is that swarm technique, that control, where you're controlling the body by the 5 appendages. Because remember, in all the situations, we always have the numbers. In a counter strategy, we have the numbers over the one attacker. 98% is that we see is usually only a one attacker coming in. So we always have those numbers. So we add that other element of how do you control the body after you disrupt their ability of shooting accurately.
Okay, so we have a couple more questions. One specifically was, would you make teachers participate in the scenario?
Scenario, educators should be participating in scenarios and drills. Remember scenario, I like to define these. A scenario, when we talk scenario, a scenario is basically a scripted outcome event. So when we look at a scenario, it's, all right, today you're going to be in the classroom and all you can use is lockdown. So you can use an enhanced lockdown like a barricade. So we tell them what they can and cannot do. That is a scenario. I think educators should be part of that environment to understand the bonus, the high ends and the weaknesses of what their thought process may be. So as they start interacting in those scenarios of scripted outcomes, they start learning what the strategies can do for them and how they can implement them in their classrooms. Now remember, a drill is basically given an event and allowing each individual to come out with their outcomes. So that in a drill, their outcome's not scripted. You allow them to do whatever they feel is necessary based on the information and the drill that's been provided. So I think it's important for people to understand what they can do in a controlled environment and be able to respond to it.
Good. Another question that came through is asking about whether there will be some type of notification provided when the student curriculum is available. I know you mentioned earlier that you're working through final edits after the pilot has concluded. So once that course is available, we will be notifying everybody through our email system. NASRO, we will we don't have any issue sharing that content with that notification with NASRO as well. Right. So we would love for everybody to be notified that the student curriculum is live and available.
Right. We have a couple more questions as well. One is, how do you suggest when you have autistic children or very low cognitive children, they are integrated in classrooms with children in different stage of development, which goes along with another question for curriculum being developed for special education settings?
Excellent questions, because we do have a lot of that integrated classrooms. When interacting with persons with special needs, understanding how do we interact with them is very important. We make those decisions, we make those outcomes in the instructional education portion called the IEP program. And we start talking with the counselor, the teacher, and the parents even that's part of that IEP meeting. And we say, all right, this is what we do. What is the best way for us to provide this information to that student? Many times if you have somebody, not so much what the label is, but what is their consideration? What is that special consideration? And we actually have a module out there in the K-12 e-learning that allows you to understand and go through how do you interact with somebody that has mobility issues, communication, touch, sound. So whether they're on the spectrum or it's a physical consideration, how do we adapt our training and information to that? Hopefully that answered that. If not, let me know and we can.
I want to add one thing to what Chad just said about that, because those resources, we've been talking about the student curriculum that is coming out soon, but the special considerations content and resources are already available. So anybody who has access to ALICE K-12 e-learning has access to the special considerations content, which includes the e-learning modules that Chad referenced and some downloadable, customizable resources that can be incorporated into each student's IEP. Again, those are available in the ALICE K-12 e-learning portal. And if you click on the resources tab, there is a folder that comes up that's called special considerations. And if you open that, it has all of the resources. And those are already available to anybody who already has access to K-12 e-learning.
So we got about 10 minutes to go, so we'll take maybe 2 more questions, and then we'll let everybody get back to work.
I think we got most of them.
Oh. Chad, I know that the student curriculum has not been finalized yet. Have we finalized delivery of that yet?
Right now, our delivery is going to be in the K-12 folder in the EL portion, just as you heard Vicki Shaw, our Director of Marketing, talk to you about in our e-learning portal, just as the special considerations folder will be there. It will have student lesson plans there. We are looking on how to deliver it as an a la carte, but we have not made that decision as of yet. So we just kind of packaged it all under the K-12 platform.
Perfect. I'm trying to see if there's any other questions in here. You covered a lot of them. A lot of people were asking very similar questions, which makes sense. So
good.
That was good.
And here you have, folks, my name and email is up there, my phone extension. Best way to get a hold of me is by email. If you come up with questions, you have anything, feel free to throw me an email, and I'll get back to you within 24 hours if it's not right away, depending on what's going on. And I'll answer any questions that you might have or on this topic or any others that you might need.
All right, perfect. I think I think we've answered all of the questions. Some of you are, I think, still asking for certificates of attending this. Know that only if people who registered for it will get access to that, to the presentation. So we're not distributing certificates at this point, but if you need that presentation to show that you attended, I can certainly work with you individually to see what we can provide, what you need. But right now, we're not planning on distributing any certificates. So again, thank you all for attending. It went a lot longer than we anticipated, which is a good thing. We will keep checking back with us because we will continue these webinar series as we move forward. Thanks so much. Everybody have a lovely day.
Stay safe.